The rain pounded monotonously on the roof of my house on Union Street. I sat in my shabby chair, watching the drops slide down the window pane, leaving a crinkled path behind them. Outside, Milpitas was welcoming late November with gray colors which matched my mood. My name is Baxter Harrington, and I am 78 years old. 5 years ago, I buried my Elaine after 46 years of marriage. After her death, it was as if I lost not only my wife but also my daughter Paige, who seemed to stop seeing me as anything more than a walking ATM machine. I always started the morning the same way. I'd wake up at 6 sharp, drink coffee, and look out at the garden that had once been Elaine's pride. I kept it in decent condition now, but the life my wife had breathed into it was gone. Neither was my house, and neither was I. The cup went cold, reminding me that I was back in my own thoughts. Thanksgiving was making me nervous. Paige had called yesterday, her voice as detached as ever. "We're expecting you at 3, Dad. Don't be late." Not even a "nice to see you" or "missed you." Just a mechanical invitation, like fulfilling an item on an annual to-do list. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling my knees aching. The weather always made my joints ache worse, though I never complained. My father had taught me that real men didn't whine over little things. Perhaps that was my mistake. I never showed weakness, even when I lost everything. In the bedroom, Elaine and I had our wedding picture on the dresser. We were so young, so full of hope. I in a strict suit bought with my first engineer's salary, she in a simple white dress her mother had made. Looking at that picture, I often wondered what Elaine would say if she saw the way her adored daughter was treating me now. "Elaine," I whispered, touching the frame, "what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong with Paige?" There was no answer, of course. Only the ticking of the old clock broke the silence of the house. I walked to the bathroom and looked carefully in the mirror. Deep wrinkles furrowed my face. My gray hair had thinned, but the eyes were still the same, tired, but still alive. For 35 years, I worked as an electronic engineer for a company that designed microchips. I didn't become a millionaire, but Elaine and I lived a decent life, managed to buy this house, helped Paige with her education, and then with the down payment on her own house. As long as Elaine was alive, Paige called every weekend, came to visit with her grandchildren at least once a month. Back then, I thought of myself as a happy old man surrounded by a loving family. But after the funeral, everything changed. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter, and always for a specific purpose, usually financial. "Dad, Christopher needs a new laptop for college. You'll help, right?" "Dad, Lauren's having car trouble. She needs $3,000 for repairs." "Dad, Oscar and I want to remodel the kitchen, but we're a little strapped for cash right now," and I always said yes. Because I wanted to be needed. Because it was the only thing that connected me to my daughter. Because I hoped that one day she'd call me just to see how I was feeling. This morning, I got ready with the utmost care. Pulled my best sweater out of the closet, the navy blue one Elaine had given me last Christmas. Ironed my pants, cleaned my old but still good shoes. After all, it was Thanksgiving, and traditions had to be honored. As I was packing, my eyes fell on a picture from the last family dinner when Elaine was still with us. We were all smiling, sitting around the big table. Paige was still looking at me warmly then. Oscar wasn't rolling his eyes at every word I said, and the grandkids weren't staring at their phones, ignoring my presence. Everything had changed so rapidly. Or maybe things had always been like this, with Elaine just serving as a buffer between me and the rest of the family. That thought was especially bitter. I pulled an envelope of money out of the drawer, $2,000 in cash, a gift to my grandchildren for the upcoming Christmas vacation. Christopher is 21 now, attending college, studying business administration. Lauren is 19, also in college, but closer to home, and has chosen psychology. I've always supported their education, paying a significant portion of the expenses. Putting the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket, I glanced at my watch. It was still early, but it was getting unbearable to sit at home, immersed in memories. I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood park before heading to Page's. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine drizzle. I opened my umbrella and slowly walked down the familiar paths. Murphy Street Park was half empty because of the weather, with only a few dog walkers walking their pets and a couple of teenagers snuggled under the canopy of the gazebo, kissing passionately. I walked along, looking at the bare branches of the trees, and thought about how I'd once dreamed of walking here with my grandchildren in my old age, telling them stories from my youth. But Christopher and Lauren are long past the age when Grandpa's stories seem interesting. The last time I saw them was 2 months ago when I visited for Paige's birthday. Christopher said hello and left almost immediately, citing a meeting with friends. Lauren was more polite, even sitting with me for about 15 minutes, but I could see her constantly checking her phone, clearly wishing she was somewhere else. Oscar, Paige's husband, made no secret of his attitude toward me. He worked as a real estate consultant and had always regarded my humble career as an engineer with some disdain. "You have to be able to sell yourself these days, Baxter, not dig into schemes," he'd say, not noticing the irony of living in a house he'd bought with my help. I made a full circle around the park and headed for the bus stop. I'd sold the car 2 years ago when my eyesight started failing me in the dark. Paige had said it was a smart decision, but I could hear the irritation in her voice. Now she'd have to drive me around if she needed to. The bus arrived almost empty. I sat at the window and watched the streets of Milpitas float by. This small town in California had become our home 40 years ago when I'd gotten a job offer at a local technology company. Elaine and I had fallen in love with this quiet suburb, deciding it was the perfect place to raise Paige. My daughter's house was in a newer neighborhood, with neat lawns and identical 2-story houses. When the bus stopped 2 blocks away, I felt my stomach clench with nervous tension. The door was opened by Lauren. She looked like a carbon copy of a young Paige, the same brown hair, the same green eyes. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, stepping aside. "Mom's in the kitchen. No hug, no sincere, 'good to see you.' Just an update on her mother's whereabouts." I made my way into the living room where Oscar was watching a soccer game on TV. He gave me a slight nod without taking his eyes off the screen. "Hello, Oscar," I said, taking off my coat. "Ah, Baxter," he finally looked at me. "How are you? How's your health?" Standard questions he didn't expect an answer to. "I'm fine, thank you." I walked into the kitchen where Paige was making dinner. She looked tense, her movements were abrupt. When I walked in, she threw a brief glance over her shoulder. "You're early, Dad," I said. 3 o'clock. "I decided to get here early to help," I replied, even though I knew she didn't need my help. Paige sighed. "Okay, just stay out of the way. I'm on a schedule." I sat at the kitchen table, watching my daughter chop vegetables for a salad. Once upon a time, she and I used to cook together. I taught her how to bake pancakes on Sundays, and she laughed when I failed to flip them in the air. Now it's like there's an ocean-wide chasm between us. "Where's Christopher?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "He'll be here later. He had college stuff." "Thanksgiving?" Paige shrugged. "He's got his own life, Dad. He'll be here for dinner." I fell silent, realizing that any topic could turn into conflict. After a while, I decided to try again. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "No," Paige said. But then, as if remembering her decorum, she added more gently, "I'll be fine. Thanks." I got up and walked out of the kitchen, feeling like an extra in my daughter's house. In the living room, Oscar was still watching soccer and Lauren was sitting in the corner of the couch, staring at her phone. Neither of them even looked in my direction. I quietly walked out to the backyard and sat on a bench under an old oak tree. From here, I could see the entire garden, manicured but impersonal, like something out of a landscaping catalog. No weird color combinations that Elaine loved so much. No experimental beds. No soul. I pulled out my phone and looked through the photos in the gallery. Here's Elaine in our garden, shovel in hand and a wide smile on her face. Here's little Paige on my shoulders, laughing so infectiously that even now, looking at the photo, I felt a smile on my lips. Here's the three of us in Yosemite, tired after a long hike but happy. When did everything change? What did I do wrong? Or was it not about me, but that the world was different, more cold and calculating? The door opened and Lauren came out onto the porch with a cup in her hands. "Mom said you might want some tea," she said, holding out the cup. "Thank you, dear." Lauren shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly not knowing what else to say. "How was school?" I asked, trying to hold her back. "It's okay. A lot of work." "Are you still thinking about psychology?" "Yeah, I like it." The conversation wasn't going well. Granddaughter looked at her watch. "I have to go help my mom. I'll see you at dinner." And she left, leaving me alone with a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. I took a sip. Too sweet. Paige didn't remember me drinking tea without sugar. Time dragged agonizingly slow. I finished my tea and returned to the house, where the bustle of preparing for the holiday dinner was in full swing. Paige was ordering. Oscar was reluctantly running errands. Lauren was setting the table. "Oh, Dad," Paige said when she saw me. "We're almost ready. Christopher just called and he's running late. We'll start without him." I nodded and took my place at the table at the very end, farthest from the hostess's seat. Symbolic. Oscar opened a bottle of wine and filled everyone's glasses but mine. "You can't have your medicine, can you, Baxter?" he said, with fake concern in his voice. Actually, I was allowed to have a glass of wine, but I didn't argue. Paige put the turkey on the table and dinner began. The conversation revolved around Oscar's job, Lauren's studies, and plans for Christmas. I wasn't asked about anything, as if I were a piece of furniture, not a part of the dinner. "By the way, Dad," Paige said, "Christopher's having trouble paying for next semester. His scholarship has been cut, that's it. The real reason I was invited." "How much does he need?" I asked, knowing I'd give any amount I could just to see my daughter soften for a moment. "7,000, Paige said, looking me in the eye. "I know it's a lot, but—" "I'll wire the money on Monday," I said. "Great," Oscar exclaimed. "I told you Grandpa Baxter wouldn't let me down. He's as reliable as a Swiss bank." They laughed and I smiled faintly back. Something inside me clenched at those words. An ATM machine. That's what I was to them. Not a father, not a grandfather, but a source of funding. "Also," Paige continued, encouraged by my pliability, "Oscar and I are thinking about going away for Christmas. Maybe you could—" "Sure," I interrupted her. "How much would you need?" Paige said the amount and I agreed again, even though I'd set aside the money to fix the roof on my house. "That's the way I like it." Oscar raised his glass. "To Baxter's generosity." I looked at their smiling faces and thought, is this really all that's left of my family? People who only remember me when they need money? Suddenly I felt a wave of bitterness and resentment rise up inside that I had suppressed for so long. But I remained silent again, as always. The rain pounded monotonously on the roof of my house on Union Street. My joints ached more than usual in this weather, but I'd long ago gotten used to not complaining. Today was Thanksgiving, and I was to spend it at my daughter's house. Not that I was looking forward to it. I slowly put on my best sweater, the navy blue one Elaine had given me for our last Christmas together. I checked the envelope with the money for the grandchildren one more time and left the house. The bus stop was 2 blocks away, and my cane tapped measuredly on the wet sidewalk, counting down the steps to the inevitable. Paige's house stood in a row of similar 2-story structures in the upscale Milpitas neighborhood. The immaculately mowed lawn, the new SUV in the driveway, the seasonal wreath on the door—all of it screamed prosperity, which was largely provided by my regular gifts. Before pressing the bell, I took a deep breath. The door opened almost immediately, as if I'd been expected. Standing on the doorstep was Paige, wearing a perfectly pressed apron and a strained smile. "Dad, you're 10 minutes early," she said instead of greeting me, glancing at her watch. "Hello, Paige," I said, trying not to show how much I was hurt by the warm welcome. The bus was ahead of schedule. She nodded silently and stepped aside to let me into the house. "Take off your shoes. We have a new rug in the living room," she said over her shoulder, heading for the kitchen. I carefully took off my shoes, hung up my coat, and walked into the living room. Oscar, Paige's husband, was sitting on the couch with a tablet in his hands. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hello, Oscar," I said, stopping in the middle of the room. "Ah, Baxter, you're here." He finally gave me a look. "Have a seat. Not that chair. It's got a wobbly leg." I sat on the edge of the couch, keeping as much distance between us as possible. Oscar returned to his clipboard, immersed in some graphs. He worked as a real estate consultant and liked to emphasize how well-versed he was in finance, especially in my presence. "How's work going?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "It's a volatile market right now," he replied, keeping his eyes on the screen. "But I've closed 3 deals this month, one of them for $1.5 million. He said it like he'd just announced a trip to the moon. I nodded, expressing the proper admiration. "Congratulations." "Yeah, it was a decent commission. Bought Paige a new kitchen appliance." He waved his hand nonchalantly toward the kitchen. "You probably noticed, right?" I hadn't noticed. I rarely noticed the material changes in their house because every visit was a psychological test of strength. Lauren, my granddaughter, came out of the kitchen. She was a real beauty, long brown hair, green eyes, just like Elaine's. But there was a coldness in her gaze that wasn't typical of her age. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, sitting down in the chair across from him. "How are you doing?" A standard question asked without genuine interest. But I was glad for at least this show of courtesy. "Thank you, darling. I'm fine. How are your studies going? You're a sophomore now, right?" Lauren nodded, glancing briefly at her phone. "Yeah, I'm studying psychology. It's pretty interesting." "That's great," I smiled. "Your grandmother was interested in psychology, too. She had a whole shelf of books." "By the way, Grandpa," Lauren interrupted me, "I wanted to talk to you about a summer internship. There's a very prestigious program in San Francisco, but it's paid. My mom said you might be able to help." "Oh, that's it. Oh, sure." "How much does this program cost?" I asked, trying to hide my disappointment. $5,000 for 8 weeks, she said, and there was an ingratiating note in her voice. "But it's a really great chance for my future. It'll be easier to get a job later." "I'll think about it," I said, even though we both knew I'd agree. I always did. "Thank you, Grandpa," Lauren exclaimed with a sudden enthusiasm that evaporated as soon as her phone vibrated. She'd momentarily forgotten I existed, engrossed in texting. Paige's voice came from the kitchen. "Lauren, come help me with the salads." My granddaughter sighed, but obediently got up and went into the kitchen. I stayed with Oscar, who continued to ignore me, which was actually a good thing. The front door opened and Christopher, my grandson, walked in. At 21, he was a carbon copy of a young Oscar, tall, broad-shouldered, with carefully styled hair and a confident smile. "Hello, everyone," he said, tossing his backpack to the floor. "Hello, Christopher," I rose to greet him. He looked at me as if he had just noticed my presence. "Oh, Grandpa, you're here already," he said, coming closer. "How are you?" "I can't complain," I answered. "How are your studies?" "It's okay," he shrugged. "A lot of work." It was the standard answer I'd heard from him for the past few years. No details, no real communication. "Chris," Oscar spoke up, "show Grandpa your new app. Maybe he'll want to invest." I looked at my grandson in surprise. He stepped awkwardly from foot to foot. "It's just a student project. My friends and I are developing an app to deliver food from local restaurants." Sounds interesting, I said. I'd like to learn more. Christopher looked at me with some surprise, as if he hadn't expected genuine interest. Really? Well, to make a long story short, we want to create a platform that brings together small, family-owned restaurants that don't have their own delivery service. And how much do you need to launch? I asked, already guessing where this conversation is going. We're estimating an initial investment of $15,000, Christopher answered, a glint of enthusiasm in his eyes. That's for app development and a basic marketing campaign. 15,000? I tried to hide my surprise. It was a lot of money, even by my standards. It's a good investment, Baxter, Oscar interjected. I've seen their business plan. With proper development, you can expect a 20% return in a year. I chuckled inwardly. Of course, Oscar had already calculated everything. And of course, I wasn't seen as a grandfather to be invited to a family dinner, but as a potential investor. I'll think about it, I said, trying to sound neutral. Great! Oscar clapped his hands together. I knew you'd be interested. Smart money will always find a worthy use for it. I wanted to answer that it wasn't about smart money, but about wanting to support my grandson. But at that moment, Paige came out of the kitchen. Everyone to the table, she announced. Chris, wash your hands and sit down. The turkey's on the table. We went into the dining room where a festive table was set. Turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, all the Thanksgiving stuff. But the atmosphere at the table was far from festive. I sat in my usual spot at the end of the table, farthest away from Paige, who, as the hostess of the house, took center stage. Oscar sat on her right hand, the kids on her left. I felt like an outsider, casually invited to someone else's party. So, Oscar raised his wine glass, let's traditionally say what we're thankful for this year. Everyone raised their glasses. Oscar poured water for me, although I wouldn't mind some wine. I'm thankful for new clients and a growing business, Oscar began. This year, Paige and I were finally able to update the kitchen and plan a vacation to Hawaii. Paige smiled at him and continued, I'm thankful for my job, for our kids going to good colleges, and for having the opportunity to live the life we want. Not a word about family, about health, about simple human joys, only material goods. I'm thankful for the opportunity to study and for new acquaintances in college, Lauren said, not taking her eyes off the phone she had placed next to her plate. And I'm thankful for my startup and for having such a supportive family, Christopher added, giving me a meaningful glance. It was my turn. Everyone looked at me, waiting for the standard words of gratitude for my health and for being able to see my family. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I'm grateful for the memories, I said quietly. Memories of a time when my family appreciated me for more than financial support. There was an awkward silence. Paige frowned. Oscar pretended not to hear, and the kids looked down at their plates. Let's get started, Paige finally said, breaking the silence. The turkey was getting cold. Dinner continued in tense silence after my unexpected toast. Paige was carefully carving the turkey, arranging the meat on plates. Oscar was pouring wine, defiantly skipping my glass. Lauren was furtively checking messages on her phone, and Christopher was awkwardly picking at the tablecloth, avoiding my gaze. Family gatherings after Elaine's death had always been tense, but today there was a special coldness in the air. My sincerity broke the unspoken rule of pretending that everything was fine, that we were a normal family, not a group of people bound only by blood and financial obligations. Who wants light meat? Who wants dark meat? Paige asked in a deliberately cheerful voice, holding her fork and knife over the turkey dish. I'll have the dark, Oscar answered quickly. Me too, Lauren seconded. I'm an omnivore. Christopher shrugged. Everyone avoided looking in my direction as if I were invisible. Finally, Paige turned to me. Daddy? Light, please, I said quietly. She nodded and continued laying out the meat, starting with Oscar's plate, then moving on to the kids and then to me. It was a small, almost imperceptible demonstration of the hierarchy in her house, but I noticed such details. Just like I noticed a lot of other things, the strained smiles, the looks Paige and Oscar exchanged when they thought I couldn't see, Lauren's ostentatious attention when it came to money. I looked at my daughter, trying to find that little girl who had once run happily toward me when I came home from work. That little girl who would ask me to tell her a bedtime story and fall asleep clutching my hand tightly. When did she turn into this cold, calculating woman? What did I do wrong? "Pass the gravy, please." Paige's voice brought me back to reality. I silently handed over the gravy boat, trying not to show how deeply these small acts of neglect hurt me. The conversation at the table was about Christmas plans, Oscar's job, and the kids' studies. As usual, I was not asked about anything. I was like a ghost at this celebration of life, physically present but invisible to the others. Except when it came to money, they suddenly remembered I existed. "So what about that $15,000 for Christopher's startup?" Oscar asked, casually as he put on his second helping of mashed potatoes. "Have you thought about it, Baxter?" "I'm still thinking about it," I answered, trying to sound neutral. "What's there to think about?" Oscar grinned. "Your money's just sitting in an account, and here's an opportunity to really help your grandson start his own business. Isn't that what every grandfather dreams of?" "It's not about the money," I started, but Paige interrupted me. "Dad, you always said you wanted the best for your grandchildren. This is your chance to really help Christopher. Plus, it's an investment, not just a gift." I looked at Christopher, who was clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Grandpa, really, if you think it's too risky," he began, but Oscar interrupted him. "Don't be silly, Chris. Your grandfather's not poor. What else is he going to do with his money? Not take it to the grave?" I felt the blood rush to my face. This insolence, this discussion of my finances at the holiday table was the last straw. "I'm not dead yet, Oscar," I said quietly but firmly, "and I prefer to decide what to do with my money." There was an awkward silence in the room. Paige gave me an annoyed look. "No one's saying you're dead, Dad," she said with a hint of irritation. "But you have to admit that at your age, it's wise to start thinking about how you're going to manage your savings. And who better to prioritize than family?" "Family," I repeated, putting into that word all the bitterness that had accumulated over the years of neglect. "Yes, family should be a priority." "But what is family, Paige? Is it just money? What are you talking about?" Paige frowned, pretending not to understand. "What I'm saying is that for the last 5 years, since your mother passed away, you've only called me when you or the kids needed money. You've only invited me over on holidays, and that's just to keep up appearances. You never asked me how I lived, what I did, how I felt." "That's not fair," Paige objected, but there was a twinkle of guilt in her eyes. "I have my own life, my own worries. I can't think about you all the time." "I'm not asking to think about you all the time," I said, feeling my voice shake. "I'm asking to remember, at least sometimes, that I'm not just a funding source, but a human being. Your father." Oscar rolled his eyes, not hiding his irritation. "Let's not ruin the holiday with all this talk," he said. "This is Thanksgiving, not family therapy." I lowered my eyes to my plate in silence, realizing that this conversation was pointless. They didn't want to hear. They didn't want to see. Didn't want to change. Dinner continued in a heavy silence. Only occasionally did Oscar or Paige make an attempt at conversation, but it faded quickly. When the main course was finished, Paige got up to clear the plates and bring dessert. "Lauren, help me," she commanded, and her granddaughter reluctantly rose from the table. They went into the kitchen, leaving me with Oscar and Christopher. Oscar immediately returned to the subject of money. "What about that $15,000, Baxter?" he asked, as if the last conversation hadn't happened. "We can make it official if you want. We'll draw up the papers, spell out the terms of repayment." I looked at Christopher, who was clearly uncomfortable. "Let's talk about this later, Oscar," I said. "Today is not a good day for business talk." Oscar snorted, clearly unhappy with my answer. Paige and Lauren returned at that moment carrying pumpkin pie and a pot of coffee. I noticed Paige say something quietly to Lauren, and Lauren barely held back a laugh. Paige started cutting up the pie, placing the pieces on the dessert plates. She put a large piece on each of them except for me. Then she went around the table, placing plates in front of everyone. "And this is for you, Daddy," Paige said, placing a plate in front of me with a strange expression on her face. I looked down and froze. It wasn't pieces of pie, but leftovers bread crusts, nibbled chicken bones, leftover lettuce and dressing. "What is this?" I asked, not believing my eyes. "Just what you deserve," Paige said, her voice ringing with the anger she'd probably been holding back for a long time. "You're accusing us of using you for money? But what have you done for this family in recent years, other than sign checks? You haven't even tried to be truly involved in our lives." I stared at the plate of leftovers, unable to believe my own daughter could do such a thing. Oscar let out a short laugh, quickly disguised as a cough. Lauren stared defiantly at her phone, pretending nothing was happening. It was only in Christopher's eyes that I saw shock and shame. "Paige," he began, but she cut him off abruptly. "Stay out of this, Chris. This is between me and your grandfather." I rose slowly from the table, feeling my hands shaking. The shock was replaced by a deep, all-consuming pain. Elaine would roll over in her grave if she saw what our daughter had become. "Thanks for dinner," I said quietly, trying to keep my dignity. "I'll be going." No one tried to stop me. No one said a word as I walked into the hallway, put on my coat, and left the house. It wasn't until I was already on the porch that the door behind me opened and I heard Christopher's voice. "Grandpa, wait." But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be able to hold back the tears that were already coming to my eyes, and I didn't want them to see how deeply I'd been hurt. I walked through the quiet streets of Milpitas, ignoring the drizzle. My thoughts were jumbled, and memories came in waves. Here was Paige, a little girl, laughing as I tossed her in the air. Here she is, a teenager, talking passionately about a school project. Here she is in her wedding dress, so beautiful and happy. And here she is today, with cold eyes and a cruel grin, placing a plate of leftovers in front of me. Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong in my upbringing? Or is it not me, but the world that has taught her to value the material over the human? When I finally got home, it was already dark. Shakespeare met me at the door, meowing demandingly. I automatically fed him without noticing what I was doing. Then I sank into my chair, feeling the fatigue and sadness come over my shoulders. But along with the sadness came something else: determination. Paige had crossed a line that could not be crossed, and it was time to stop this vicious cycle of giving and giving and giving, getting nothing in return but more and more insolent neglect. I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking about what I was going to do. It was a drastic decision, but I couldn't see any other way out. If Paige thought she could treat me like a doormat and still use my money, she was sorely mistaken. Finally, nearing midnight, I picked up the phone and dialed. "Noel, it's Baxter Harrington. I'm sorry to call you so late." "Baxter?" My financial advisor sounded concerned. "Is everything all right?" "No, I'm not okay," I answered honestly. "I need you to do something. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the banks open." "Sure, anything." "I want you to freeze every account my daughter Paige has access to, every single one of them, and prepare the paperwork to change my will." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It's a big decision, Baxter," Noel finally said. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I answered, feeling my resolve strengthen with each word. "I've let myself be used for too long. It's time to end it." "Okay," Noel sighed. "I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll stop by your place tomorrow afternoon with the paperwork." "Thank you," I said. "Good night." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in a long time, I felt not only pain and bitterness, but also a strange relief, like I'd finally shed the heavy weight I'd been dragging around all these years. Shakespeare jumped into my lap, curled up in a ball, and began to purr. I absent-mindedly stroked him, staring into the darkness outside the window. "You know, Shakespeare," I said quietly to the cat, "sometimes you have to lose something to realize that you never had it in the first place." I woke up to the insistent pounding of rain on the roof. My old body was aching after last night's turmoil, but my soul was surprisingly calm. The decision made during the night seemed even more right in the morning light. Shakespeare, curled up at my feet, looked at me with his one amber eye, as if approving of my actions. "Good morning, old boy," I said, scratching him behind the ear. "It's going to be a rough day." I took a leisurely shower, ate breakfast, and called Noel to make sure he hadn't forgotten my request from the night before. "I'm on it, Baxter," the financial advisor assured me. "I'll be at your place around 3 with the paperwork." "Thank you, Noel." I paused. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's not for me to decide," he finally said. "But if you're asking for my personal opinion, yes, I think sometimes you have to be tough to protect yourself, especially when it comes to money and family. Those two things rarely go well together." His words made me feel a little better. Noel wasn't just my financial advisor. Over the years of working together, he had become something of a friend, one of the few people I could be candid with. After breakfast, I decided to take a walk. The day was chilly, but the rain had stopped and the clouds were slowly parting, promising a sunny afternoon. I walked leisurely through the familiar streets of Milpitas, thinking about how strange my life had turned out. When I was young, I had envisioned old age very differently. I thought I would be surrounded by a loving family, taking care of my grandchildren, passing on my knowledge and experience to them. Instead, I became an ATM machine for my daughter and a distant old man for my grandchildren, from whom I could get money for my studies or startup. How did that happen? I always tried to be a good father, worked late nights to make sure Paige had everything she needed, helping with homework, taking her to parks, reading books before bed. Maybe I was working too hard, or not showing enough emotion. Elaine always said I was too reserved, that I should talk about my feelings more often. But I was raised differently, in a family where men didn't flaunt their emotions. I was so deep in my thoughts that I didn't notice the phone in my pocket vibrate. It wasn't until the vibration happened a third time that I pulled it out and saw a string of messages from Paige. They were all written in capital letters, as if she was yelling, "Daddy, what's going on with the bank accounts? Why can't we withdraw money? Call me back right away." I took a deep breath. So Noel had already started my errand. Good. Paige needs to realize that her actions have consequences. I didn't immediately respond to the messages. Instead, I continued my walk, reaching a small park where I like to sit in nice weather. There, I sank down on my favorite bench and prepared myself for the inevitable conversation. The phone rang almost immediately. It was Paige, of course. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Dad." Paige's voice sounded panicked. "What's going on?" "Oscar and I were trying to pay for a hotel reservation in Hawaii, and the card wouldn't work. Then I tried to check our accounts, and it turns out the access is blocked. Is there some kind of bank error?" "It's not a mistake, Paige," I said in the same calm tone of voice. "I've ordered a freeze on all the accounts you have access to." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You... what?" Paige finally squeezed out. "But why? How could you?" "After dinner last night, I've been rethinking a lot of things," I answered, "and I've come to the conclusion that our relationship needs some adjustment." "What relationship?" Paige's voice trailed off into a scream. "You froze our money over some stupid argument at dinner?" "It wasn't our money, Paige," I corrected gently. "It was my money that I was letting you use. And it wasn't about the fight. It's about the plate of leftovers you put in front of me with the words, 'It's the only thing you deserve.'" Paige gasped. It was just a joke. You took it too seriously. A joke? I felt anger rising inside, but I forced myself to speak calmly. Humiliating my dad in front of the whole family is a joke? You know, Paige, I've been thinking a lot about where I went wrong with your upbringing. How you could grow up to be so, heartless. I'm not heartless, she was outraged. You just don't understand modern humor. Maybe, I agreed. But I know when I'm being used. And for the last 5 years, ever since your mother passed away, you've done nothing but use me. You only called me when you needed money. You only invited me over on big holidays, and that was just for show. You never asked me how I lived, what I did, what I thought about. I have my own life, Paige shouted. I have my own family, my own worries. I can't think about you all the time. I'm not asking for all the time, I replied. But at least once in a while I could remember that I wasn't just an ATM machine, but a living person, your father. It's not fair. Tears came to Paige's voice. You've always been like this, always making exaggerated demands, never forgiving, never forgot anything. I grinned bitterly. How easily she turned everything upside down, trying to make herself look like the victim. Paige, I've forgiven you for a lot of things. Too much. I gave you money when you asked for it, even though I knew you were just taking advantage of me. I kept quiet when you and Oscar discussed me like I wasn't even there. I tolerated neglect and indifference, but there's a limit. And yesterday, you crossed it. And now what? Paige sounded angry, mixed with panic. You're going to leave your own daughter destitute? Don't be so dramatic, I said. You have a job. Oscar has a job. You're adults and you're perfectly capable of supporting yourselves. You're just going to have to live within your means now, not spend my money on Hawaii and a new kitchen. What about the kids? Paige exclaimed. What about their education? You always said education was the best investment. I still do, I said. And if Christopher or Lauren come to me directly for help with their education, I'll think of a way to help them. But not another dime is going to go through you. You can't do that. Paige was getting hysterical. It's cruel, it's petty. You're getting back at me for some stupid joke. I'm not taking revenge, Paige, I said calmly. I'm just stopping letting you manipulate me. And by the way, I also changed my will. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, I'm meeting with Noel today to sign the new documents. Most of my estate will go to charity. I'll leave a small amount to Christopher and Lauren directly, bypassing you. And you and Oscar will get nothing. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Paige spoke, her voice cold and calculating. You're going to regret this, Dad. I'll contest the will in court. I'll prove that you were incapacitated when you made it. I know a psychiatrist who can prove that you have senile dementia. I felt a chill run down my spine. Is my daughter really capable of such meanness? You're bluffing, I said, but without much conviction. Not at all, Paige's voice was ringing with steel. I'm not going to let you ruin my family's future because of your senile whims. If you don't come to your senses and make things right, I will sue you. And believe me, I'll win. Who'd believe an old man who lives alone and talks to a cat? I felt my breath catching. How does she know about Shakespeare? I mentioned him only yesterday in passing. Is she really following me, or is this just a coincidence? Paige, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. You can threaten all you want, but my decision isn't going to change. I'm of sound mind, and any real doctor can tell you that. And if you decide to go down the road of perjury and bribing specialists, you risk losing not only your inheritance, but your freedom as well. You're bluffing, she repeated my words. Not at all, I answered in her phrase. I have a tape of last night's dinner, a hidden camera in the brooch your mother gave me, which I always wear on holidays. It shows you putting a plate of leftovers in front of me and saying those words. And now I have a tape of you threatening me. That was a lie. There was no hidden camera. But Paige couldn't know that, and I heard her draw in a sharp intake of air. Did you taped us? Without authorization? That's illegal. Maybe, I agreed, but it's a lot less illegal than falsely claiming incapacity or attempting probate fraud. So, Paige, you might want to think twice before you start this war, because trust me, you're not going to win it. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could almost physically feel Paige frantically mulling over her options, trying to find a way out of the situation she'd suddenly found herself cornered into. "This isn't over," she said finally. "You can't just cut us out of your life." "I'm not cutting you out," I replied. "I'm just stopping letting you use me. If you ever want a real, healthy relationship with me, no manipulation, no financial demands, just father and daughter, my door is always open. But as long as you only see me as a source of money, we have nothing to talk about." "Don't play the victim." Paige was getting hysterical again. "You've always been like this. Cold, calculating, emotionally unavailable. Mom was the only one who could stand you. And now you've decided to take it out on us for all your complexes and failures." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Is this really how she's seen me all these years? Cold and calculating? Me, who gave everything so she wouldn't need anything? Me, who worked overtime to pay for her better college? Me, who supported her financially even after she got married? "I'm sorry you feel that way, Paige," I said quietly. "But it just proves that we've really stopped understanding each other a long time ago. Maybe this distance is what we need, to redefine what it means to be a family." "Family?" She laughed bitterly. "What family, Dad? You've always been a loner. Even with Mom, you were more like a roommate than a husband. Always in your circuits, your microprocessors. Never had time for real intimacy, for conversation, for emotion. And now you're accusing me of being the same?" I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Maybe there was some truth to what she said. I'd never been a particularly emotional person, never been able to put my feelings into words. But was Elaine really that unhappy with me? We'd been together for 46 years, and it seemed to me that there was a deep understanding between us that didn't need constant verbal affirmation. "Paige," I finally said, "we each have our own version of the past. I can't change your memories or feelings, but I can say one thing. I've always loved you and your mother, even if I didn't know how to show it the way you wanted me to." "Loved?" she snorted. "Love doesn't come in money, Daddy. And you never had anything else. Not for Mom, not for me." "And yet you're calling me now because of money," I said bitterly. "Not because you miss me, not because you want to get back together. It's because I've turned off the financial spigot." Paige was silent. I could hear her panting, as if she were holding back a sob or a fit of rage. "I'm going to sue," she finally said, "for freezing the accounts, for illegal recording, for moral damages. You're going to be sorry you ever messed with me, Dad." "I already do," I replied quietly, "but not for freezing the accounts. I regret letting our relationship get to this point." "It's all your fault," she shouted. "It's always been yours." "Maybe," I agreed. "But now I'm trying to fix it, even if it's not the way you'd like it to be." "You're not fixing anything," Paige hissed. "You're making it worse. And believe me, I will find a way to make you pay for it, literally and figuratively." With those words, she hung up the phone. I slowly put the phone down and looked at the screen. The conversation had lasted almost 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity had passed. I sat on a park bench feeling the sun peeking out from behind the clouds, warming my old bones. All around, ordinary life was going on. Young mothers strolling with strollers, elderly couples strolling leisurely along the paths, children playing on the playground. None of them were aware of the storm that had just erupted in my soul. Paige was right about one thing. I wasn't particularly good at expressing my feelings. Maybe that was the root of our problems. But her accusations of being cold and calculating, they were unfair. I've always tried to do what I thought was right for my family. It's just that our ideas of what's right have apparently diverged. The phone in my hand vibrated with a message from Noel. He said he'd be at my place at 3, as agreed, with the papers ready for me to sign. I replied with a quick, "Okay," and got up from the bench. It was time to go home and prepare for the next stage of this unpleasant but necessary transformation of my life. On the way home, I thought about what Paige had said about the trial. Was she bluffing, or was she really willing to take that step? And if so, how far would she go in her revenge? Was I strong enough to withstand this confrontation? I didn't know the answers to those questions. But one thing I did know was that there was no turning back. I had made my choice, and now I had to go all the way, no matter how hard it was. The autumn sun cast a soft glow on my living room as I met Noel Pritchard. My financial advisor showed up at precisely the appointed time, 3 o'clock sharp, with a leather briefcase full of documents. His calm, friendly face expressed understanding and sympathy without pity, for which I was especially grateful. "Baxter." He shook my hand firmly. "Everything is ready as you asked." I led him into the office where I'd once worked on projects for the company, but now mostly read and paid bills. Shakespeare, wary of visitors, didn't run away this time. He must have sensed something important was going on. "Coffee?" I offered. "With pleasure," Noel nodded, laying out the papers on the table. While I fiddled with the coffee maker, Noel talked about the legal aspects of my decision. "The accounts have already been frozen, as you requested. Your daughter no longer has access to them. It was a bit of work, of course, because it's a pretty unusual request. But everything was done cleanly, legally. There's nothing to complain about." "Thank you." I put a cup of flavored coffee in front of him. "She already called me. Threatened to sue." Noel nodded, not surprised. "It was to be expected. But frankly, she has no grounds for a lawsuit. The accounts are in your name. You only gave her access. It's your right to revoke that access at any time." She implied that she might try to prove I was incapacitated. Noel snorted. "Good luck with that. I've known you for over 15 years, and if anyone asks for my professional opinion, I'll confirm that you're in good health and of sound mind. Besides, such accusations require serious medical evidence, not just your daughter's desire to get your money." His words put my mind at ease. After talking to Paige, I was really starting to worry that she might take drastic steps. But it seemed that legally I was protected. Now about the will. Noel pulled a folder of documents out of his briefcase. "I've drafted it according to your wishes. 80% of your estate goes to a charitable foundation for young engineers. 15% to your grandson Christopher, but with the condition that he can only receive these funds when he reaches the age of 25. The remaining 5% is for Shakespeare's care, should he outlive you." I looked over the documents, nodding in satisfaction. Everything was exactly the way I wanted it. The Young Engineers Fund was particularly close to my heart. I'd once started out with a small scholarship myself, which had helped me get an education. Now I could help other talented kids who may not have had the same opportunities. "What about Lauren?" I asked, remembering my granddaughter. Noel raised his eyebrows. "You didn't mention her during our conversation. Do you want to include her in your will?" I wondered. Lauren wasn't overtly mercenary like her mother, but she wasn't particularly fond of me either. Our relationship had always been superficial, reduced to the standard phrases when we met and requests for financial help. "No," I finally decided. "Let's leave it at that." Christopher was the only one who'd ever shown any genuine interest in me as a person, not as a source of money. Noel nodded, showing no disapproval of my decision. "Good. Then we're all set. All you have to do is sign these documents and I'll have them notarized today." I took the pen and stood still for a moment. Is this too drastic a step I'm taking? Wouldn't I regret it later? But then I remembered the plate of leftovers, Paige's dismissive words, the years of neglect and manipulation. No, I won't regret it. It was the right decision. With a steady hand, I signed all the necessary pages. "Great." Noel gathered the paperwork back into the folder. "It's official now. Anything else you'd like to talk about? I leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Yeah, there's something else. I've decided to take a trip. Noel raised his eyebrows interestedly. Really? Where to? Japan, I answered, feeling my heart grow warm just thinking about it. Elaine and I had always wanted to go there. We planned a trip for our golden wedding anniversary, but we didn't have time. Noel nodded understandingly. That's a wonderful idea, Baxter. When do you plan to go? As soon as I have the necessary paperwork. 2 or 3 weeks, I think. I'd like to spend a month or two there, if I like it. What about Shakespeare? Noel nodded at the cat who was perched on the windowsill watching us with interest. I made arrangements with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She's an animal lover and was happy to look after him. Plus, I'll pay her well. Sounds like a great plan. Noel finished his coffee and set the cup on the table. I'm happy for you, Baxter. Honestly, I've wanted to tell you for a long time that you let your daughter do too much. But I didn't think it was right for you to interfere in family matters. You were right, I sighed. I've let myself be used for too long. Clinging to the illusion of family instead of recognizing the truth, Paige has long seen me as nothing more than a wallet on legs. Don't be too hard on yourself, Noel said softly. You did what you thought was right, and you're doing what you think is right now too. After all, that's how life is supposed to be, by following your values and beliefs. I nodded gratefully. After Noel left, I sat in the chair for a long time, thinking about the changes that were coming. Strangely, I felt no fear or regret, just a quiet, calm anticipation of a new chapter in my life. The next day, I went to the travel agency. A young woman with a pleasant smile helped me find the best itinerary for Japan and book hotels. Are you traveling alone? She asked as I filled out the reservation form. Yes, I answered, and for the first time in a long time that word didn't make me feel lonely. Just me. That's great, she smiled. Traveling on your own is a great way to discover yourself and enjoy your freedom, especially in a country as wonderful as Japan. I smiled back, feeling a forgotten sense of anticipation stirring inside me. The last time I had experienced something like this was when I was young, when I was just starting to work on new projects full of uncharted possibilities. When I got home, I began to make a list of things I needed to do before I left. First and foremost was to talk to Christopher. I didn't want him to hear about my decision from his mother and her twisted interpretation. Dialing my grandson's number, I was more nervous than when I'd signed the new will. What if Paige had already turned him against me? What if he shared her mercantile view of our relationship? Grandpa? Christopher's voice sounded surprised, but not hostile. Hello, Christopher, I said, trying to sound casual. Do you have a moment to talk? Sure, he said. Is something wrong? My mom was very upset yesterday, but she didn't explain anything. I took a deep breath. Yes, we had an unpleasant conversation. I think you should know my side of the story. I told him everything about how my relationship with Paige had changed after Elaine's death, about how I'd been used, about the plate of leftovers, about my decision to freeze the accounts and change the will. I wasn't sugarcoating or trying to make myself look good, just stating the facts as they were. Christopher was silent for a long time after my story. I didn't know it was that bad, he said quietly. I mean, I've noticed how Mom and Dad treat you, but I thought it was just an adult relationship. Relationships are different, I answered, but they should always be built on mutual respect. Unfortunately, in your mom's case, that respect is long gone. And this story with the plate, Christopher was clearly shocked. I can't believe my mom would do something like that. I couldn't believe it either, I sighed. But it happened. What now? Christopher asked. You're not going to hang out with us anymore? I'd like to stay in touch with you, I answered honestly. You're the only one who's always treated me like a human being, not an ATM machine. As for your mom, I don't want to completely cut ties, but I think we need a pause. Time to think and rethink our relationship. I understand, Christopher said quietly. And I'm really sorry, grandfather. If I'd known it was like this. It's not your fault, I interrupted him. This is between me and your mom. You don't have to choose sides or feel guilty. What about my studies? He asked, and I felt a pang of disappointment. Did he really only care about money in the end? But Christopher continued immediately. I understand if you don't want to help anymore. I could take out student loans or get a part-time job. I breathed out a sigh of relief. No, Christopher. I'll still help you with your studies. It's just that now the money will go directly to the college without your parents. Thank you, Grandpa. He sounded genuinely grateful. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I said softly. Just know that I'm always on your side. And there's something else I wanted to tell you. I'm going on a trip. You are? Christopher sounded genuinely interested. Where? Japan. Your grandmother and I have always wanted to go there. That's great, Grandpa, he exclaimed. When are you going? In 2 weeks. I plan to be there for a month or two. Wow, Christopher exhaled. I'm a little jealous. I've always wanted to go to Japan. Those temples, the gardens, the technology. Maybe we could go together someday, I suggested, surprised by my own words. That would be cool. Christopher sounded genuinely happy. I'd really like that. After talking to my grandson, I felt much better. At least not all the bridges had been burned. There was still a thread that connected me to my family, albeit a thin one, but a strong one. The next 2 weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. I got my visa, bought a new suitcase, and found the right clothes for the trip. Mrs. Chen listened carefully to all the instructions for Shakespeare's care and assured me that the cat would be perfectly safe. I expected that Paige would still make herself known, with calls, threats, or even a visit, but there was no word from her. Apparently she was still digesting what had happened, or perhaps she was already consulting with lawyers. Either way, it was for the best. I could focus on preparing for the trip without the distraction of conflict. The day before I left, Christopher dropped by unexpectedly. He looked a little embarrassed, standing on the doorstep with a small box in his hands. Hi, Grandpa. I was wondering, well, maybe you could use it on your trip. He handed me the box. Inside was a late-model compact digital camera. Christopher, this is too expensive, I started, but he interrupted me. Please take it. I've been saving up for it, but I want you to have it, so you can take pictures in Japan and then show me. I was touched to the core. This simple gesture meant more to me than all the material goods in the world. Thank you, I said, hugging my grandson. I'll be sure to take lots of pictures. And will you write to me? He asked. Tell me how it was, what you saw. Of course, I promised. Every day. Christopher hesitated for a moment, then asked, How are things with your mom? Has she called you? I shook my head. No. Did she say anything about me? Not really. Christopher looked uncomfortable. I mean, she said you'd had a fight about money and that you were being unreasonable, but she didn't give any details. I see. I wasn't surprised. Paige was always good at making things look good for herself. Well, maybe it was for the best. We both needed time to cool down and think. She'd be furious if she knew I'd come to you, Christopher admitted. You're a grown man, I said softly. You have the right to decide who you want to talk to. He nodded, but there was worry in his eyes. I could understand it. It wasn't easy to be caught between his mother and his grandfather. Don't worry, I reassured him. I won't embarrass you, and I won't ask you to choose sides in this conflict. Thank you, he exhaled with relief. I just want you to make up. I just want things to go back to the way they were before. I smiled sadly. Christopher was still young, and he didn't realize that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Time will tell, I said, not wanting to dash his hopes. In the meantime, let's just enjoy the moment. Would you like some tea? I can tell you about the places I plan to visit in Japan. We spent the evening talking about traveling, about his studies, about his future plans. Not once did we mention Paige, the conflict, or money. It was just a warm, human conversation, grandfather and grandson, the kind of conversation I'd always dreamed of having. As Christopher left, he gave me another big hug. "Take care of yourself out there, okay? And come back." "I will," I promised, touched by his concern. In the morning, I checked my suitcase one last time, stroked Shakespeare, who seemed to understand that I was leaving and rubbed against my legs with special insistence. "I'll be back, old boy," I told him. "Mrs. Chen will take care of you." The cab arrived on time. I closed the door of the house, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Part of my life was still here, the memories, the habits, the routine. But something new, unexplored, was waiting ahead. On the way to the airport, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed over the past weeks. I had gone from being an uncomplaining ATM for my daughter to a man who had finally taken his fate into his own hands. It was painful, it was difficult, but it was necessary. I didn't know what the future held. Would I ever make up with Paige? Would I meet new friends? Would I find new hobbies? But one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't going to let myself be manipulated anymore. I wouldn't let myself be used for money. I would not allow my dignity to be violated. At the airport, I turned on my phone one last time before boarding. There was one new message from Christopher. "Have a safe trip, Grandpa. Looking forward to your pictures and stories. Love you." I smiled, feeling a warming feeling in my heart. I may have severed my connection with my daughter, but I had gained a real connection with my grandson. And who knows what else I will find on this new journey, this new chapter of my life. When the boarding call for my flight was announced, I resolutely turned off my phone and headed for the gate. Ahead of me was Japan, the land of the rising sun. Symbolic, isn't it? For me, too, a new sun was rising, the sun of freedom, self-esteem, and new opportunities.